So today, to hopefully get into some of that holiday spirit with all of you, I'm going to be sharing about 20 lesser known features or aspects of Cyberpunk 2077. Some of these outright hidden features, things you literally didn't know you could do in the game, and unless you know the hotkey, you just didn't know that was an option. Some are very, very helpful. A few other things that will take you to certain locations, get you some free stuff, actually level up your character even a bit quicker, and hopefully overall get you some more enjoyment out of this immense and extremely deep game. And in particular with this one, I'm going to show you what is probably the single most overpowered weapon / cybernetic implant you could get in Cyberpunk, and also a unique interaction with the fingers Ripper Doc that you may be kicking yourself about. I'm actually particularly happy with this one. I feel like there's a lot of helpful stuff in here that even I wasn't too aware of. Half of the fun of making these videos is some of them I just pick up on my own while playing. Other ones, as I'm doing the research, I'll actually learn and start using in my own playthrough. So if you do enjoy, you can leave a like or get subscribed. It's definitely a ton of fun making these videos, and I should have a couple more on the way. But otherwise, first, let's just start with some quick and easy ones that will blow some of your minds like it blew my mind. So right off the bat, if you were not aware, Cyberpunk does have a quick save functionality. Many of us do know once you open the pause menu, you hit F5 on PC or Y/triangle on consoles to quick save. If you didn't know that was an option, now you do. But even further, on PC alone, you could actually just hit F5 at any point to make a quick save. You don't actually have to open the pause menu, which is something I've been doing for the duration of this game's release. And something that may blow your mind even a bit more, you could actually change the radio station in the car. Yeah, of course, we have this big pop-out menu you can cycle through, but you could just switch through the radio stations as you're driving. Basically, the way this works is you have to hit the radio key, so that's going to be R1 on consoles or R by default on PC twice. So for whatever reason, if you hit it once, nothing really happens, but if you double tap it real quick, then from there on out, you just hit the R key at any point and it'll go to the next radio station. And from here, you could cruise around and just cycle through the radio. This is a huge lifesaver for me. I had no idea this was a feature. Considering how good the music is in this game and how good the radio is, it makes the driving experience a lot more fun to just find that song that really matches the vibe you're going for. One that may blow some console players' minds if you hit the start key. It'll of course open up the regular menu, but if you hold the start key, it'll directly open up the map. So no longer will you have to go through the menu to get to the map, you just hold that start key down and it will automatically open up the map. This one's a bit more obvious, but I know there's some people out there that aren't aware of this. So for the holstering and Hot Wheel menu in this game, if you double tap the triangle or Y key or Alt on PC, you'll holster your current weapon. So 2 taps on that button and you'll put your weapon away, 1 tap and you'll take it out, which is obvious, it actually says it on screen. And then if you hit that key again once more, it will cycle to your next weapon. You can go through all of your weapons this way just with 1 key press. But also if you hold this key, it'll open up the weapon wheel. So if you hold Y, triangle or Alt for a couple of seconds, this whole setting will come up. Now on PC, it's way more useful because it's way more functional. On consoles, you have to hold the joystick and you actually end up having to hit a ton of buttons at once to switch around items in this. But if you aren't aware, there's a weapon wheel in Cyberpunk that is sometimes kind of handy. In particular, I find it really useful for switching from a cyberware like a missile launcher to a grenade. So if you're using something like the Mantis Blades, but you also want to use grenades sometimes, this is a good way to get that route without going through the menu. One huge feature that you can kind of abuse, but really just take advantage of oftentimes in Cyberpunk is enemy respawn behavior. One of the biggest tips I see people requesting is how to make some more money in the game without using an exploit or cheating in some way. And I would say this is a pretty good option, as it is basically just using an intended game feature, or what seems like a somewhat intended feature. But more or less in Cyberpunk 2077, when you clear out a group of enemies, and it seems like you more or less have to take down every enemy in a group, these not necessarily being those actual designated assault in progress locations or the blue icons on your map, but just a group of enemies that are standing around somewhere. If you just run away to the point where they kind of despawn or deloads that area and it's really not that far, like just a 30-second run in a different direction, then turn around and come back, they'll all respawn. So depending on the location you use this at, you could just have consistent, pretty high level enemies spawn and then kind of farm them over and over again. The best place I found to do this, and especially for Netrunner characters out there, those seeking some of those rare cyber hacks, go to Pacifica and specifically go to the Chapel Fast fast travel location. It's one of the places it'll take you during the main story, and slightly north of that location, just at this little alleyway, you can see there's going to be a landing pad here. You find this just off that main road. In this little alleyway, there'll be a bunch of voodoo boys that spawn. You may have had to do some of the voodoo boy quests, or at least the one voodoo boy quest, to actually get to this point, but for me it seemed to work most of the time either way. And basically clear them out, and a lot of them will drop rare and or epic items, and even more importantly, they also have a chance at dropping demons. So after clearing these enemies a few times in a row, I actually had them drop some of the rare demons you could get in the game, several being epic demons that will kind of take you a little while to find. And then more or less after looting all of their items, or if you are looking for demons specifically for your character, just run away. I typically would run to the middle of the road or the end of the road, turn around, come back, and they will all respawn. It's a good way to just farm a lot of top tier loot. And of course, after the fact, you can take all of that loot and just sell it to one of the local vendors or sell it to the drop box that is right around the corner. It's really handy. And again, you could use this same mechanic with any group of enemies you find in the world, as long as it's not job related. Although another important mechanic to keep in mind, if you are farming enemies or trying to get some pretty good drops, if you just kill an enemy in the traditional way, they'll typically have just 2 drops. One item on their character, sometimes they'll have a couple of items on their character, but some pretty forgettable stuff like ammo or some kind of junk, but then they will also drop their weapon, which tends to be a bit more valuable. There are several quick hacks you could use in this game, like the suicide quick hack or the weapon malfunction quick hack, and this will actually lead some of those enemies to drop 2 weapons, so 3 items in total. It's just a small tip, but it can be pretty handy if you are farming things repeatedly to get a couple of extra drops through that farm route. In particular, this is handy on some of the higher tier enemies like netrunners, because they tend to drop higher tier items. So you might get 2 rare weapons instead of just 1, or 1 rare and 1 epic. Okay, but now the single most overpowered item in all of Cyberpunk, and I'm pretty confident in saying that, we do have the Tranquilizer rocket arms, as these things are just stupidly OP. So of course in Cyberpunk 2077, you can get rocket arms on your character. These are pretty good, and they will typically be quite expensive. You can shop around at the various Ripper docks, but you'll typically be spending over 50,000 eddies to get them. But once you actually do have them, they're extremely fun to use. You've probably been seeing me use them in several videos. But for just 500 eddies, if you go to this Ripper dock in Haywood, right on the west side of the map, kind of near the water here, it's very easy to find, you can buy a Tranquilizer augmentation for the rocket arms or projectile launch system. And this thing is stupidly broken. Like, it'll probably get nerfed, so depending on when you're watching this, it may be changed. As basically what this will do is, after installing this for, again, just 500 eddies plus the cost of the arms themselves, if you shoot an enemy with a rocket and they are a humanoid enemy, it'll just tranquilize them. So technically it's a non-lethal now, but just 1 rocket will take out any enemy. I tried this against enemies that way out level me. I tried it against some cyber psychos that were way higher level than me and I probably couldn't fight otherwise, and just hit them with 1 rocket. And considering if you have smart link, these will just automatically track and home to enemies. You just one-shot kill everyone. It's almost broken to the point where it's not fun anymore, because you just spam the middle mouse key, at least on PC, shoot a few rockets that auto track to people, and just take out a group of high-level enemies in a couple of seconds. It's literally that broken. And even just to demonstrate this, a comparison to what a regular rocket with a different mod would look like, it's not nearly as effective. It takes way longer to take down these enemies just using the traditional rocket system versus the OP Trank rockets. So although you'll probably have quite a bit of fun messing around with this, it is broken to the point where it almost kills enjoyment. So what I found myself using is just kind of keeping it in the back pocket. If I ever got frustrated or just wanted to get through a mission and was tired of dealing with some tough enemy, I would equip this and deal with things pretty quickly. But now I also have some disappointing news for some of you, as there's also this really cool cybernetic implant you can get from one specific Ripper dock, that being Fingers. And some of you will remember Fingers because in the main story of the game, without giving away spoilers, specifically it is while you're doing some of the Mox quests involving Evelyn. During those quests you will encounter this Ripper dock. He comes off as kind of creepy and you have an option to punch him, and well, if you punch him you will lose access to him as a Ripper dock, including the pretty cool cybernetic enhancement I'm about to show you, because you'll never be able to buy it if you chose to punch him during that early on quest. So the 2 main cybernetics people want from him are the Link advanced pause, which allows you to run more stealthily, so you could actually run and maintain stealth sometimes. But the much cooler ones are the epic fortified ankles, which it seems like only he sells, as what this will do is make it so, one, you have reduced fall damage, but also it gives you a super jump slash hover. So you get super jumps from other Eripidocs in the world, but with this one, after you jump really high, and that's what the super jump is, instead of a double jump, you just jump higher with one jump. If you actually aim down sights, you'll kind of hover for a minute in midair. This can make for some pretty epic moments in gameplay. Jump up above a bunch of enemies, aim down sights, and you're kind of hovering around them, and you could shoot them in the head or do whatever you want to do in a cool fashion. It's pretty cool. Now, in my opinion, there's some other cybernetic implants I definitely prefer over these, but for some of you, it's a bit disappointing to know you cannot get them, at least on your current save, because you punched fingers. One of the most powerful quick hacks in the game, especially because of its RAM cost, is the system reset quick hack. Depending on the enemy you are against, it may only take 10 RAM, but it will instantly take them out in a non-lethal way. And that includes cyber psychos. So literally go to a cyber psycho, use this quick hack, and you'll just be done with the fight. It seems to work with nearly all of them. There are a couple of exceptions depending on the cyber psycho. And this particular cybernetic is actually pretty easy to get, and you may have a side quest that you could do right now to get it. So technically spoilers for this side quest, but honestly, it's not super story related. It's a relatively minor side quest, but it's going to be called Cold Mirage, and it's given to you by Nyx. He's located in the afterlife, and it seems like you may have to do some of the other afterlife related quests in Act 2 to actually unlock this. But otherwise, specifically, you're going to want to go to this point in the Badlands, this actually being where Dex is, so it is a notable location for other reasons. You could find a iconic weapon here, and more or less, if you actually have this quest unlocked and you can do the Cold Mirage quest, you'll find this stinky fridge with some old stuff in it, including a cyber deck. You'll have some dialogue back and forth, but ultimately you're going to want to take the cyber deck from here, and then it'll take you to the afterlife where you'll talk to Nyx. I would definitely make a save at this point, but more or less through the dialogue, what you want to happen is Nyx is going to try and hack into the cyber deck. After he hacks into the cyber deck, some bad stuff's going to go down. He ends up shutting down and glitching out with sparks flying everywhere. And more or less what you're going to want to do here is actually access this terminal and just go through the typical data mine process. It was relatively easy on my build. I would make a save before you do this so you could give it several attempts if you fail, or just give it a few tries in general. But more or less, if you are successful with the data mines, Nyx will come back to you. You just did save him, and he's so grateful that you saved him that he's going to give you a variety of rare quick hacks, including the system reset quick hack totally for free. You just have to do this simple side quest. It seems like if you tell him not to do it, or if you go through different stages on this, he'll give you a follow-up quest where you also can get that quick hack, but this seems the easiest, and you get to save him, you get his goodwill in the process. And again, this particular quick hack is extremely valuable. It's very useful against cyber psychos, although some of you may not have enough RAM to actually use it on your current character. One of the best cyber decks you can get earlier on in the game, and kind of the worst legendary cyber deck, is going to be at the Kabuki Ripperdoc. It's right here on the map, just the one located in Kabuki, and more or less for 35,000 eddies, and you need 14 street cred, which you should get relatively early on, you can get the Raven Cyber Micro Mark IV. It's not the best in the world, but it does have 6 slots for quick hacks, 10 RAM, as well as 8 buffer. And although 35k is not the smallest amount of money in the world, it's something you can gain access to early on with just a few side jobs. And that 10 RAM number tends to be pretty important because a lot of those higher end quick hacks do actually require 10 RAM or more, but using things like Breach Protocol can give you access to those quick hacks. So it is pretty handy to get this one early on, especially if you're going a Netrunner build. I've actually just been using it in my videos in the background for quite a while now, as it is quite handy. So another pretty big tip that some of you are going to be angry you did not know earlier is around crafting or just looting or buying legendary items. So as you know, with the legendary items in this game, specifically weapons and armors, they typically have some kind of effect, a base damage value, some elemental effects they may deal, or something weird about it, and then also a certain number of mod slots. So you can actually re-roll these effects, and there are different ones if you're crafting it or buying it. So for crafting, basically when you actually click on the weapon, click off the weapon on one of the other craftable ones, then go back to it. You may notice huge differences in the overall damage output. Go back and forth doing this a few times, but you can see here with the 05 sniper, for me to craft the legendary version, there's nearly 100 damage difference in these different rolls. You can do the same thing at vendor, simply wait 24 hours, the vendor stock will refresh, but also the different legendary attributes on their legendary weapons will change. So you can wait a few times, see which combo is the best. I don't have B-roll for this one, but it also applies to legendary weapons in the wild. When you see an enemy drop a legendary item, you could actually quick save and then actually load that save and go back to them, and it might have a different role. So before you go to loot the enemy, just take a look at your minimap, see if anybody dropped a legendary, make a save there, run up to the legendary, then load the save if you want to see if it has a different role the second time. But then let's transition into some more story focused or related tips to hopefully give you more enjoyment doing the main quest, side quests, and even just jobs and gigs. So just a minor one, but a cool one to make note of. When you load into the game, specifically from the main menu, loading one of your saves, whatever's going on in the background oftentimes is related to what you just did in the story. So depending on which quests you may have just completed, you might hear a news broadcaster or even Johnny himself commentating on your actions. It's a minor detail, but this will change and evolve as you complete more of the game, and it's nice from time to time to just listen to what they're saying. As far as the overall jobs, it seems like there's a couple of jobs that are accessed only by actually either A, reading messages on a terminal, or B, actually reading shards in your inventory. So if you have a ton of unread shards, it might be a good idea to just go through them. It might unlock either new options in jobs or even new jobs altogether. Another important one, in particular for these blue NCPD jobs, some of them are only available at certain times of day. It's only a few, but it's particularly relevant for somebody trying to complete every one if you're on the last couple. Some of these jobs seem to only be available after 8 p.m. and seemingly 8 p.m. to midnight or 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. So if you're struggling to find some of the final ones, I would wait until it's a bit later in the day or after 8 p.m. and try looking again at the map. There are ways to actually increase your options on a job and even give you additional dialogue choices. Sometimes while doing a quest, selecting some of those blue dialogue choices will actually give you additional orange choices later on. It's not super common, but it definitely does occur at a fairly regular rate, so it's just a good thing to keep in the back of your head. If you're enjoying a quest, enjoying a character, the game may actually reward you for talking to them a bit more. But even further, the same thing applies to certain shards and reading messages on computers in the world. When you're at a location or doing a job, you may notice a ton of shards scattered throughout, or several terminals that actually have messages giving you backstory. If you open them up in game, sometimes when you talk to an NPC later on, you could actually talk about what you found. It'll give you a different avenue based off what you discovered. Another one that's not super common, it seems to be more prominent in some of the bigger side jobs, but it is worth noting nonetheless that is something the game does consider from time to time. Another small thing a lot of people definitely miss out on that isn't a full-fledged quest but a nice gesture. After the heist mission, after you finish the prologue and get into the Act 2 open world segment of the game, just go on your phone and call Jackie. There's a pretty cool little gesture there that I think a lot of people overlook. Although somewhat speaking of Jackie, there's been some rumors or confusion around iconics and getting iconics on this wall. I talked a bit about it in a past video. In this game, if you scrap an iconic weapon, for the vast majority that'll be it. It'll be deleted forever and there's no way to get it back. Except for some iconic weapons in Cyberpunk 2077, you can actually get a crafting recipe to make them. So then of course you could just actually craft that iconic weapon and get many of them even if you do delete it, and of course craft duplicates. But even further, there are crafting recipes to upgrade iconic weapons, and these will be notable in that they'll actually have the weapon as a requirement. Some users have stated that if you take this perk that gives you a 10% chance at upgrading an item for free, you can actually craft the upgraded iconic weapon, which will typically consume the old one, but you'll have a 10% chance of it not consuming it. I tried this a ton, I did a ton of testing on my own save, and it doesn't seem to work this way, because technically you are not upgrading the weapon, but rather crafting a totally new one. It's in the crafting section, not the upgrade one. So for at least some of the weapons you want to put on your wall on your apartment, unless you're using something like a duplication exploit or console commands to spawn the item in all likelihood you'll only get one copy and you'll have to leave it in your stash if you want it to be displayed here. Although weapon you can get a duplicate of, one to have in your inventory, one to display on the wall is Jackie's pistol. Similar with calling Jackie. After you finish Act 1 of the game, get into Act 2 and the open world segment, that being after the prologue ends, you can give Mama Wells a call. It's this hero's quest that will pop up. I don't want to spoil what happens during this quest, it's very short. At the end, you actually can get Jackie's bike also, but if you wait a couple of days after the quest does end and do return to the location where it did take place, this being right here on the map, it's relatively easy to find. There's a nice fast travel point just down the road from it. If you run into the bar, you'll actually find 2 copies of Jackie's pistol. So you take one for yourself if you want to use it on your character. It's definitely not the best pistol in the world, but it does look pretty cool. And then use the second copy to put in the stash in your apartment and it will pop up on your wall of weapons. A couple of tips for those of you playing the game on a weaker PC that are hoping to get some improved performance. Just right off the bat, it still seems like there's some oddities with the performance overall. Some of the patches put out by CD Projekt have fixed these, but there also just seems to be some underlying issues there even still for a select group of players. But if you do set all of these settings to the lowest preset, preset to try and maximize performance, this may leave characters looking pretty bad. It'll vary from segment to segment, but two settings you could turn up to make characters just look quite a bit better without a huge cost to performance are contact and local shadows. So to simply turn these both on from their off settings, even if you leave it on the lowest setting, and in my experience, it'll actually make your characters just look a lot better. Their faces will have shadowing again, it won't look as flat and just kind of odd in general. And again, this didn't really seem to have a huge impact on performance one way or another. Another small thing to keep in mind is on PC, at least by default, the game does launch in borderless windowed mode. In my experience, switching it to full screen did get me a couple of FPS at certain times, and in general ran better, especially if I had other tabs open on a second monitor. And if you are struggling to keep above 60 FPS or even above 30 FPS, this is definitely a good one to do, and I would highly recommend it. I'm going to have a more in-depth tip video on leveling up skills in the future, but a couple of quick tips that definitely make leveling up certain skills quite a bit easier. Also, it's important to note your skill level will only go up to the corresponding attribute level. So if my body attribute's only at 10, the skills under that will only go up to 10 also. For the stealth skill, which definitely proves to be one of the most handy for many players, as stealth is very popular and a lot of fun in this game. After you finish a fight, you could actually just pick up all of the remaining bodies that you probably left on the floor and dump them in containers, and this will give you about 100 to 150 stealth experience each time. It's a pretty simple one, but it does give you quite a bit of experience if you're doing this consistently, especially for some of the earlier levels of stealth. It'll help you level up a lot quicker. For the engineering skill, which I've seen a lot of people struggling with, killing with grenades or killing people through walls actually gives you experience towards this. I feel like a lot of grenades have been overlooked in this game because a lot are quite powerful and you do tend to loot them fairly often, so you probably have quite a few in your inventory that are just kind of freebies there. And finally, one skill you can completely exploit if you want to. If you take out a weapon in this game, specifically some kind of firearm, not a melee weapon, you could just quick melee the air and it will give you experience towards your athletic skill. Now, this is pretty tedious and will take a long time, definitely not the most efficient way to do this, but you can very easily set up a macro or just have the game spam the Q key, at least on PC, and you can max out this skill pretty easily. A couple of tips for vehicles. An easy one, you can actually change the third person height while you're driving with a setting in the menu. So it's literally just two options. You could set how high the camera will be as you're driving in third person from low to high. I find high driving to just be way easier, way more enjoyable. I did this literally the day the game came out and I've never looked back, but even further, this is one of those ones I'm sure 95% of you know, but that one person that doesn't is going to be like, oh, what? So if you actually hold the key that you use to call your vehicle, it'll pop up with a list of all the vehicles you do own, and you can call any of those vehicles. I saw a couple posts online of some people who didn't realize that once you get a new vehicle, it doesn't delete or remove access to all of the old ones. And in fact, you could actually call multiple vehicles at a time if you wanted to. This one's kind of a weird part of the game, but there's actually an ammo limit, and it's not at an obvious value. For example, for me, the rifle ammo limit was at around 750 to 800 ammo. And then once you hit this limit, you are just capped out. If you buy more ammo, it will just get deleted. If you craft more, it'll get deleted. And the game doesn't really tell you that you hit this limit. So just make note of that. You're probably looting ammo all the time. And of course, you can actually craft ammo in your inventory or buy it from vendors, but also maybe just every once in a while, stop off and sell a bunch. If you just have copious amounts of it, this isn't going to give you a ton of extra money, but what it will do is allow you to loot ammo freely and not just have it get deleted. One final one that I think a lot of people overlook is you should probably turn up the difficulty once you hit the mid and especially at the late game. Once you start speccing into a certain build with your character, you just get really strong. And in my experience, and I think a lot of others, turning up the difficulty a bit once you get more into your build is just going to make the game a lot more fun. You'll find yourself actually relying on your cybernetic implants or whatever thing you are specced into. Otherwise, once you hit the mid game, get a couple of good weapons, you can kind of just do whatever. I typically found myself just running around, guns blazing, getting shot at repeatedly, but it didn't make much of a difference because my armor was so high and I could take down enemies so quickly. Turning up the difficulty won't resolve that altogether, but it'll make you think a bit more. You might die a couple of times and actually have to plan out a route, which is the way this game is meant to be played. When it forces you to do this, you actually find some of those hidden paths or cool considerations CD Projekt made, and overall, again, it just makes the game a lot more fun. But otherwise, those are about 20 or so additional additional tips or secret features in Cyberpunk 2077 that hopefully you guys will find helpful. I hope you guys are having a ton of fun with this game. I know at least some of you probably just got it for the holidays, and I should have a lot more content on the way. I do want to take a look at some of the mods that have come out, as well as actually give some of my own impressions after playing the game for the past few weeks and what I think got right and wrong. With that said though, I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.